And welcome back to my weekly blog. The following is going to be debate from the state budget bill that was discussed this last week and passed the House 59-40. I hope you enjoy some of the comments from myself, Democratic Leader Scott Inman, and Appropriations Chair Scott Martin. As always, you can go and check out the entire transcript, the entire debate at www.okhouse.gov. Thanks a lot, and I look forward to hearing some of your comments.
Representative Dorman, you're recognized for 3 minutes and 10 seconds debating against passage of House Bill JCR 2301.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As one of the benefits I have out here from being a former staffer with the institutional knowledge, I learned more from shadowing Jim Hamilton, the Appropriations Chair, my first couple of years on staff, right out of college, than I have been able to contribute as a member of the Appropriations Committee, whether it be a subcommittee or as a full committee member in 11 years. I'm speaking to you freshmen, you sophomores out there. I want you all to pay attention to this. The membership has very little say-so in what goes into this. And that's not a fault of Chairman Martin. Chairman Martin's put in a lot of work to this, just as Chairman Sears did before him, Chairman Miller before him, and so on and so on. But the fact is the system is broken. And until we change the system, until we get the votes up there, 51 red votes plus, the system will always remain the same. The membership will not have a say in how $7 billion is spent on our state services. I want you to think about that. $7 billion of what we're putting out there for state resources, for state services, and only 2, 3, or 4 members in this body had a say in how that was spent. Why the membership is not more offended on this, I have no understanding. I have no concept of that. I would like to see it at the table. My freshman term, when we went through a severe budget shortfall, every single member of the House of Representatives was a member of the Appropriations Committee. Every single member served on a subcommittee. Every single member contributed into an individual subcommittee beneath that subcommittee, interviewing agencies to determine where that money would be spent. Do you know that's the last time we came close to zero-based budgeting? I remember Republican leader Fred Morgan out here when I was a staff member year after year saying we need zero-based budgeting. We need to start at zero with these state agencies and come up with a way to spend this money efficiently and responsibly for the citizens of the state of Oklahoma. When have we done that in the last 11 years? When have we actually sat down with a state agency and asked them to give us their entire budget and go through and look penny by penny on how they're spending that for the people of the state of Oklahoma? Can any of you tell me when we've done that? Because I wasn't at the table for that meeting. Were you at the table for that meeting when you pulled in DHS and said, how do you spend this money? Were you at the table when you asked Department of Corrections, how do you spend this money? Were you at the table when you pulled Janet Barisi in and asked, how are you treating the teachers of the state of Oklahoma? I wasn't at that table. Were you at that table? Well, let me tell you, you will never be at that table unless you are the vice chair or the chairman of appropriations or the speaker of the House. It's time to make a statement.
Representative Inman, you're recognized for 7 minutes and 55 seconds debating against passage of JCR 2301.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this issue before us is all about priorities. Priorities. What are your priorities? What are ours? What are the priorities of our constituents? The people that pay our salaries to come up here and represent them. What are their priorities? What are your priorities as a member? Why are you here? Who do you listen to? Before I get into the meat of the bill, I want to address the concept of who you listen to. The representative from Oklahoma City got up and gave a passionate speech and dealt with a little bit of this. I have no doubt, especially for you freshman Republican to whom I'd like to speak right now. I have no doubt that over the last few days, maybe the last few hours or the last few minutes, you've been pressured and said you've got no other alternative. You've got no choice. You have to do this. I realize you wanted troopers to get more money, or teachers, or DOC, or state employee bonuses, or you wanted more money for veterans. I realize all of that, but you have no choice. That's how this process works. Well, for you freshmen who weren't here last year, I'd like you to look up the vote on Senate Bill 1975. Because last year at this very time, Senate Bill 1975 was a vote on the budget, and I'll be darned if that budget, after those same words were spoken to the members of the majority party last year, that budget died on this floor. First time in 7 years that a budget had died. And there were 17 Republicans, 16 of whom are still in this chamber today, who voted no, who had the courage to stand up and tell their leadership, I get you, but you can't boss me around. And they voted no. 17. So don't be fooled and made to believe that you have to go with whatever leadership tells you to do, because oddly enough, of that 17, there are a few of those folks who are in leadership today. So good things came after their no vote. So what are your priorities? My priorities when I came into the State House of Representatives to ensure that government was streamlined, effective, and efficient so that the outcomes for children, public safety, health care, and transportation were the best possible we could afford. That was my priority. And I dare say it's your priority. Most of you, when you knocked on doors, just as the representative from Oklahoma City said, didn't say, I'm here to vote however Shannon or Inman want me to vote. You said, I'm up here to make sure that education's taken care of and public safety and roads. That's what you said. Maybe you even said you wanted a tax cut. You didn't get that this year, did you? How does this bill reflect your priorities? How does it reflect our priorities? State troopers and Department of Corrections officials have some of the most dangerous jobs in the state. Absolutely, the most dangerous jobs in the state. And yet they haven't seen a pay raise in 6, 7, 8 years. And we're told, well, we simply can't afford it. Have you all looked to see exactly how much that would cost? For the Department of Corrections and state troopers, a pay raise for those hardworking men and women would cost $19.5 million. $19.5 million out of a $100 million budget? That's a lot of money. No. Out of a $1 billion budget? No. Out of a $7.1 billion budget, the leadership of this building couldn't find $19.5 million to give to folks who put their life on the line to protect us. Couldn't do it. Why not? Priorities. What are their priorities? This year, instead of giving education what they needed, they gave education a little bit more. But after it's all said and done, you ask your education leaders back home, I've talked to mine in Middale, come December of this year, common education will see a net cut because of this budget. A net cut in per pupil expenditures. That's a fact. A net cut. And if you vote for this budget, you're in essence voting for a net cut to common education. At times when things are tough, no. Our budget has grown in the last 2 years by nearly $600 million. And we're still offering common education a net cut. Priorities. So if they're not giving education what they need, maybe they're giving higher education what it needs. Higher education needed $23 million for debt service that a deal that was cut in this chamber and in this building required them to pay. So they got it this year. After much wrangling and gnashing of teeth, they got $23 million. And then they turn around and said, but you realize it's going to take $28 million in addition to that for mandatory costs. Costs that they themselves said we want to incur. No, costs that this building said higher education must incur. Oh, well, then we must have given money to them to take care of those costs we told them they have to pay. No, we didn't do that either. Matter of fact, we shortchanged them by $18 million. So who's going to pay for that? Any of you all have kids in college? Your children are going to pay for it. Any of you all have constituents in college? Your constituents are going to pay for it. So we couldn't get it there. So then, okay, so education, no. Troopers, no. DOC, no. Common Ed, higher ed, no. Where? Oh, I get it. I see now. There is $95 million in this budget for office space and renovating buildings. $95 million to fix buildings. The Governor Fallon said just not too long ago that all we needed was $10 million to start the process. We'll get to it later. Why didn't we do that? That's $50 million. Did you do the math earlier? $19.5 million. We could have taken 50 of the $60 million we're going to spend on fixing the Capitol right now, and we could have doubled what the troopers and DOC wanted, just like that, without hurting anybody else. Or with that $50 million, we could have given the troopers and DOC what they wanted and then turned around and given state employees who haven't had a pay raise in 5 or 6 years, given them a one-time bonus. Could have done it all with that $50 million, but we didn't do it. Why not? Priorities. So what else did we do? We created a $30 million maintenance revolving fund. On top of that, $60 million for the Capitol. What are we going to do with that? Well, we're going to fix dilapidated buildings. Well, Representative Brown in his budget said, okay, that makes sense. Even in our budget, we said we ought to keep some money for the state capitol. So in that revolving fund, we kept about $8 or $9 million aside and said, let's start fixing buildings a little at a time. And use another $21 million to take care of education, common ed, higher ed, health care, transportation. But it's not in this budget. And why not? Because of priorities. So if you've been told there's no more money and there's no way to find it, look at our budget, go ask anybody in the know, and they'll tell you different. In reality, the money does exist. The money's there to take care of public safety employees. The money's there to take care of state employees. The money's there to take care of education. The money's there to take care of higher ed, to keep tuition from increasing. The money's there for veterans, which is in our budget. It's all there. It's just a matter of where your priorities are. The House Democratic Caucus offered up this budget for one reason, because our priorities different from what's being offered in this bill. Our priorities will allow us to go back home to our constituents and to look at the state troopers around the state and say, we would have funded you. We would have done it. We wouldn't have spent $90 million on office space. We would have taken care of you. And you can do the same thing. If you'll stand up and vote no with us on this budget, I promise you, they'll scramble and they'll find a way to take care of troopers and corrections and education. Do the right thing. Show your priorities and vote no.
Representative Martin Scott, you're recognized for 10 minutes debating in favor of passage of JCR 2301.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, to begin with, first I want to thank the Speaker for giving me the opportunity to do this job. You wouldn't think I'd be thanking anybody for this at this moment, but it has been an honor to serve as all of your budget chairman. Not just for one party or the other, but for everybody in the House. It really is a true honor. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank my vice chairman for his efforts, the team of legislators that we've assembled as our subcommittee chairman, and those of you that I think everybody in the House has been appointed to serve on an A and B subcommittee, and I appreciate your efforts. I'd certainly be remiss if I didn't thank our incredible fiscal staff who year in and year out just do a incredible, fantastic job, certainly not only responding to my request, but to your individual request also. They're there for us and do a fantastic job. Recently, in our church home, we're kind of in one of those transition periods. You've probably all been there where you had a long-term pastor who retired, and you're in that interim period, trying to find the person that God has for your church. For us, it's taken a while. I think we're about into, over a year now of that transition. We've had for about 10 months, we had just a fantastic man of God that came and served as our interim pastor. And not too long ago, he had, his 10 months had come. He was going to move on to other obligations that he had. And on his last Sunday, and this was during session, he gave kind of a farewell address, knowing that the weight of an interim pastor and this transition time in our church was weighing on a lot of people. One quote that he left, or one statement that he made that really has stuck with me, I knew it would come in handy somewhere along the way in this process, was unity is not uniformity. Unity is not uniformity. We all come from a myriad of backgrounds, places in this state. We all have different likes, dislikes. We all, some are on one party, some are on the other party. Some of us are tall, some of us are short, whatever the case may be. We all may not be uniform, but we can be unified. And I've thought about that as I think about this process. I know everybody has probably their own ideas about how the process should work. And so last night I thought, what are some other processes? And I mentioned this in committee yesterday or the day before, whenever it was. And I tried to think of some good examples of other processes that have worked and how they worked. I thought about the founding of our country, the Declaration of Independence. and also our Constitution. In both instances, there were a committee of 5 that was established to draft those documents. For the Declaration, it was Adams, Franklin, Livingston, Sherman, and Jefferson. Of course, Jefferson often gets credit for being the author. I'd probably be remiss if I didn't mention somebody else I found in my research was Timothy Matlack, who was the engrosser. So we all need a good staff person, to get things done. So when it came down to it, 56 people signed on the dotted line. We look at the Constitution. Here again, a committee of 5. But I think James Madison is the one who typically gets the credit for being the author of the Constitution. 39 of the 55 delegates signed that. Now, I stand before you today not to be misled that I'm anything like Jefferson or Madison. I'm not, I realize. But I'm the person who, for whatever reason, was selected to lead the effort. Let's look at even more modern times. Reagan and O'Neill. The two of them crafted some fantastic policy, worked together in the 80s to move the country forward, even a little bit more recently. Clinton and Gingrich. But those two sets of men I mentioned were from different parties, but collectively they led the national government forward. And if we look even further back, we think about God. He dealt directly with Moses in regards to the Israelites. For whatever the reason, however it works out, certain people are set aside to lead a cause. And in this case, for whatever reason, it was me. And I'm really proud and excited to be able to do that. Now let's look at the budget. I was able to pull, early in session, both the Republicans and the Democrats set out their on our side, it was our strategic plan that was developed back in December. On the Democrat side, it was their caucus agenda. And as I look through them, it's amazing to me to see just how close we've come to the priorities that were laid out. And just how close we've come to being unified, even though we're not uniform. I know on our side of the aisle, education was the number one priority. If you look at the other side, let me read down some of their priorities. Reinvesting in Oklahoma through a pay-as-you-go budget rather than relying upon bonds and increasing our state's indebtedness. So whose principles are we talking about? We have provided a way to do that. We have provided a way to fix this capital, not by putting ourselves in further debt. They also mention utilizing growing revenues to reinstate full funding for core public sector services, including education and transportation. Nobody's budget takes into account the $300 million that was initially requested from the Department of Education, because we don't have enough growth revenue to do it. So I ask you, if we're going to fully fund education, who are we going to cut? Should it be the Department of Corrections or maybe Public Safety? Should we cut them to fund the Department of Education to their fullest? They also had in here increasing funds to mental health care. I think the final number was about $25.5 million. We've increased, I've already mentioned this, and one more thing, reinstating funding in public schools and programs such as National Board Certified Teacher Bonus. I've already suggested we're going to line item that to make sure that we uphold our obligation to those teachers. We have put 43% of all of our growth revenue into common education. If you add in higher ed and career tech, 60% of the growth revenue we had went to education. $31 million for health care, $44 million for Department of Human Services. Like I said, $25 million for mental health. Transportation, as I said on debate, was almost, they didn't even come ask me for more money because this body has already taken the lead on that and made that a priority. We've put $2 million more in juvenile affairs, $3 million into career tech. On and on and on, as some of my colleagues have already mentioned about the priorities. You look at our own strategic plan. I've already mentioned workers' comp, education, support families and individuals through, not in this bill, but certainly through a tax cut. We have met the principles and priorities that we laid out on both sides of the aisle. Go figure. We were able to do it. I contend that we are far more unified than we might be uniform. But we are unified. We have an opportunity to make a huge difference today. We have and can set our priorities. We've done it with this budget. And while there's detractors here, there's detractors there, we have made an incredible effort to set the state's priorities. Members, we are a united body. Even though as I look across the room, we may not be completely uniformed. I ask you to unite with me here in just a moment and vote for this bill for the people of Oklahoma. Thank you.